Hello and welcome to the Cyberden, your weekly dose of tech and games. I'm Jake the Voice, and I shall be chatting with professional MIDI composer and Doom modder extraordinaire, Jimmy Paddock. Thanks for coming, mate.
Yeah, no problem. It's great to be here. Very exciting.
All right then, mate. All right. So now let's start off with the bread and butter question. Yum. So please tell everyone listening, what was your introduction to Doom? When did you become a fan, and what inspired you to create your own maps?
So I remember being introduced to Doom at a very early age. The game came out when I was just 2 years old, and I want to say that my dad got a hold of the game pretty much as soon as it came out. And I remember him saying something along the lines of it was among the first software that he ever installed on his old Pentium PC back in the day, back in the early 90s. That's obviously when games came on like floppy disks and things like that. So yeah, I remember that being one of the first things that he showed me as a kid. Like a bit of a strange thing, perhaps, to show a 2-year-old, but I think that's how it went down. And like I do remember being one way or another mesmerized by computers of the early days. As a small child, like, you know, as soon as I got introduced to them, basically they were like magic to me. So I just sort of took to them very, very quickly, and basically became quite enamored with computer games of the time. So, you know, your Doom, your Duke Nukem 3D, Heretic, Hexen, yeah, other like things like I got into a few strategy games as well. So things like Dungeon Keeper, StarCraft, Red Alert, things like that. And as I was a very sort of creative kid, even from quite a young age, like I want to say maybe around about 8 or 9 is when I really started to take a vested interest in this sort of stuff. I did become very interested in modding for certain games. And funnily enough, I think the first game that I started making maps for was Duke Nukem 3D, using the build editor. A lot of those maps, I've recently come across them again, as a 30-year-old professional, quote unquote, composer slash map designer, and a lot of that old stuff is, yeah, it doesn't exactly hold up to par, but it's quite an interesting time capsule nonetheless. I'm always I've always been interested in editing those games, and like it is a really interesting time capsule back into what I used to do as a kid. So Duke 3D mapping sort of gradually sort of ebbed away, and I became more interested in Doom, I guess, as I matured, I suppose. And eventually, like I was sort of creating in a vacuum. I wasn't creating with the assistance of any community members, or I wasn't being informed by any online content that was available at the time. This would have been the early 2000s, probably. So I wasn't getting any help from anyone really. So it was all kind of like self-contained stuff, and none of it really reached fruition, I suppose, is the best way of describing it. So yeah, again, I think back in the early 2000s, it must have been, I eventually stumbled on the online multiplayer community for Doom, back in the days when Skulltag was still the premier port of choice for a lot of multiplayer Doomers, and I became absolutely infatuated with the community there, and with the multiplayer port itself. Like, it's just a ton of fun to play Doom multiplayer, and the tools that I had access to at the time, I think I did download a copy of Doom Builder eventually. I'd been using DeepC up to that point, which was a very old editor that doesn't quite hold up to modern scrutiny. But yeah, I grabbed Doom Builder. I started making multiplayer maps. I started playing a little bit in the competitive space online, not like in the leagues or anything, or being part of any clans particularly, but I played a lot of deathmatch, a lot of capture the flag, things like that, in the Skulltag space. I think my first community project with Doom was Sabbat Martyr Deathmatch, which was spearheaded by my good buddy Mechadon, who is still creating maps today. And obviously, today he's still part of the Supplice game project, which I'm very much looking forward to seeing where that goes. Still part of that team, obviously, still making music, and want to eventually make some maps for it as well. So yeah, it's sort of come full circle in a way, with I guess Mechadon being like the pivot point, I suppose, in my tenure in the community. But yeah, so I guess that's how I started out, just making multiplayer maps and then gradually moving over to the single player space when I started to realize actually I can probably make my own single player campaign for Doom. You know, I've been in the multiplayer space for maybe 2 or 3 years now, and I want to get my single player mapping prowess up to speed. So I I think that was the birth of Genesis, or the genesis of Genesis, I suppose you could say, which was my first outing into single player mapping for Doom, and that wound up being a 32 level megawad project that took me about, I think, 13 months to make. I was speed mapping a lot of that stuff. I was really probably quite probably at the height of my creativity back then, at least in that sort of early era of mapping. I did get through some of those maps very fast, like spending probably 12 or 14 hours a day just mapping in some instances. So I think that was my first exposure to mapping for personal projects and mapping in a speedy capacity. And yeah, and I think from there it just sort of graduated to becoming more involved with the community on a slightly deeper level. I started making midis around about 2007, maybe 2006, and just put them on the forums. And I was like, hey, here's some stuff if you guys like it. I'm just making music over here and probably going to continue doing so. So if you guys like this music, have at it. People really enjoyed the midis, and that really sort of fed the cycle of being able to just compose music for the Doom community explicitly. And I remember my first big gig, I suppose you could call it, was I think 2008 with Plutonia 2. So I have the team behind that project to thank for that. They basically sort of fished me out of the water and then were like, hey, do you want to make some midis for us? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I think Plutonia 2 is still celebrated today quite a lot. Not just for its maps, which are, it's an awesome collection of maps, but also for that music that I wrote probably, nearly 15 years ago, which, it's stunning to think nowadays that, I've been doing it for this long. But yeah, I did recently celebrate my 15th anniversary in the Doom community. I think it was last April, or, last March, actually. So yeah, I've been at this for a while and don't plan on stopping anytime soon.
I'm sure many people listening would really hope that you don't stop anytime soon, most certainly. I mean, I certainly hope you keep at it. Another 15 years plus, cross fingers.
Hope so, yes.
Okay, so where is it that you actually draw inspiration from with both your compositions and Doom maps? Do you have any favourite mappers, or maybe any favourite composers, for instance?
Yeah, it depends largely on what I'm listening to or what I'm playing at the time. I remember being inspired. I think I've got to say that my chief mapping inspiration is Eric Arm, who was the designer behind the Scythe series, Scythe 1 and 2. Very, very celebrated Doom mapper. He really knows his stuff. His design, like in terms of, structures and encounter design and things like that, it's all second to none. So he's a very, very top tier mapper in the Doom community, and I always sort of was able to look up to him, I suppose, particularly with how fast he seemed to work. Scythe 1 and 2 were released quite close to each other, I think. So yeah, and they're both like 32 level campaigns. So he made a lot of maps and he made them quite quickly. So I guess there was an element of being able to see another another designer working fast and efficiently, and that sort of spurred me on in a way. So yeah, Eric Arm definitely has inspired me in a lot of ways. I would say Mechadon as well, but I think Mechadon is a mapper unto himself. Like, he's in a league entirely of his own, and I rarely go to pains to emulate his style. It's extremely complicated, multifaceted design, lots of awesome layering of areas. Interconnectivity is absolutely insanely well done. And he makes great use of stock textures. And again, his encounter design is incredible. Like, lots of very, very fun encounters and stuff like that. Just trying to think who else may have inspired me recently. I suppose, in a way, I have to thank Skillsaw as well for being one of the premier mappers going today. I'm trying to lean more into his style, I think, as the years go by, because I'm seeing a lot of people are informed by his style and are becoming very keenly aware that he really knows what he's doing, like in terms of, especially with combat. Like his combat is like sharp as a nail. Like you won't find any, I don't think, better combat in the Doom scene than in a skill saw map. Yeah, I think, you know what, also Matt Tropiano, probably one of my earliest mapping inspirations. I wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly why, because he doesn't have a lot of early Doom maps to his name, particularly, aside from like his Megawag project that he made when he was like, I don't know, 14 or 15 or something. But it was, I think, his stuff in perhaps Community Chess 3 that was quite inspiring to me. I wouldn't be able to say why though. Like it's I've worked with the guy for years, and he's an absolutely brilliant guy. He really knows his stuff. He's an excellent programmer, second to none. He's been project manager with Adventures of Square, and that's been amazing to have his assistance there. The project wouldn't be what it is without him, not in terms of just management, but also in terms of overall design, sound design as well, voice acting. He's done basically all of it. But yeah, his early mapping, I suppose, did influence me a bit. Just a lot of his community efforts just seemed to, I don't know, spark something, a little inspirational spark in me somehow. But yeah, it's been quite a privilege to work with these people directly over the years as well. My tenure in the community, obviously spanning 15 years. Some of these people did start quite early, and around about the same time as me, I suppose. So yeah, I haven't worked with Eric Arm yet. Hopefully, Eric Arm comes back to Doom mapping eventually. I'd love to see that. So yeah, all sorts of inspirations in the Doom scene currently. I'm sure that the pool from which I draw inspiration from will morph and change over time as well, because I mean the community is constantly evolving. But I think those are the names that jump out to me. So with music, I think, like I said earlier, it does largely depend on what I'm listening to at the time. I think back in the day, I used to listen to a lot of electronic music, stuff like, quite a bit of drum and bass, dubstep, synth wave, or whatever it is, back in the day, and like that did inform some of my music for sure, for a time anyway. But I think my main influences with regards to composing MIDIs bespoke for Doom projects would have to be with Mark Clem and David Shaw. So those two guys are essential pillars, I think, of early MIDI composition in the Doom community. They go back as far as 95, 96. And I remember, I think it may have been David at the time. I remember speaking to him, and it was funny. Like I remember David saying that he and Mark would converse over landline phone about what they were doing for their next Doom project. I think that's right. So yeah, it really puts into perspective. And of course, Mark Clem's an absolutely insane composer. He worked on Wacky Wheels, which is an absolutely incredible soundtrack, just full of fun and energy. His stuff with Memento Mori 1 and 2, his stuff with Requiem, Strain. This is all stuff that he teamed up with David Shaw as well to compose. So those two, I think, are the giants of the community in terms of MIDI composition. And they really informed my, I think, earliest attempts at MIDI composition. So I think if we to start at the beginning, it was probably Mark Clem and David Shaw that informed my craftsmanship with MIDI making in the early days. So I would use lots of heavy guitars, lots of bombastic percussion, perhaps peculiar chord progressions and strange synths, which is, I think, was more David Shaw's sort of stuff, and funky bass lines as well. That's David Shaw as well. Whereas, yeah, like bombastic percussion and heavy guitars, that's more like Mark Clem's thing, I think. But yeah, the two are kind of inseparable in my mind. They are equally talented individuals. They do a lot of very, very cool stuff in the community. And they were active as well fairly recently, still in the community with their Requiem Reimagined project. So it was Mark Clem, David Shaw, and Jeremy Doyle both teamed up to re-record and remaster all their work for the Requiem community project, which I think released in 96, 97. So that was a 32 level Doom map set that was essential at the time. I still love it. It's one of my favorite sets, probably of all time. And yeah, I've had the privilege of being able to speak to Mark and David, and they've been and they are essential pillars of the community. I think from an early time in the community, they were informing me about what I should do and how I should compose. So yeah, I put those two as like my probably top two. Beyond that, yeah, just the bands that I listen to just tends to very much shape what I do in terms of my musical output. So things like Symphony X, I think, was the first band that I really started to get properly obsessed with as a developing teen. And funnily enough, I heard one of their songs for the first time, or I heard them as a band for the first time through Eric Arm's Scythe Megawad. So it was through Doom that I heard about Symphony X, and then it's through Symphony X that I've started to write more complex Doom MIDIs. So I think they would be my first port of call for bands that have influenced me. Them and Dream Theater as well, among the top, easily. So yeah, I do enjoy my progressive music. That's definitely at the forefront of my musical preferences. If it's a little bit off kilter, a little bit strange, I do very much enjoy it. So yeah, there was progressive metal, heavy metal, things like Black Sabbath, a little bit of heavy metal from the really early days. Yeah, that sort of thing has very much inspired me over the course of my musical career, and I think continues to do so.
You've done your fair share of speed mapping projects with the Doom community, that's for sure. For those who don't know, for those who have been living under rocks, of course, speed mapping is where you basically create levels, in this case for Doom, with a very, very limited time frame. What is it that you love about speed mapping? Where is it that you kind of draw inspiration from with these maps in particular? Or is it just kind of like improvised as you go along kind of dealy?
It's a little bit of both, I suppose. There's a lot of off-the-cuff, seat-of-the-pants style mapping, but there can be quite a bit of forethought that goes into it as well, especially if you're, like, for instance, partaking in a speed mapping event that is scheduled beforehand. And that's, I think, where I got my start with speed mapping. So I think if we go back to like 2013-ish, that's when the Tango TV Doom speed mapping projects were taking off. So you'd have mappers like Tansman, Alfonso, Myonic Donut. Those, I think, were probably the trifecta of people who were like there at the beginning. Obsidian as well, actually. Obsidian's been there from probably the very start. And from there, I think I basically caught the bug for speed mapping in quite a big way. So yeah, these were really fun sessions. We'd all gather on Skype, and basically, I think Tansman would stream it on Twitch as well at the time. And we would all basically gather in a big Skype call and just shoot the shit, and just to have a laugh, while we're making these maps. And a lot of it would be just like very, panic mode. Oh God, I'm running out of time. I haven't put like the exit in the map yet, or I haven't textured this bit, or this bridge isn't working, all that sort of thing. It was a great sort of communal event to be part of, because we were all kind of like doing it seat of the pants style. Even if some of us knew the themes beforehand, it was always a little bit of a rush to the finish line, because I think we only had about it was 100 minutes we were given to make maps. So yeah, I think it started as 5 in 100. That was the name of the set, wasn't it? Five maps in 100 minutes. So 5 of us would get on a Skype call and just map until we couldn't map anymore. So yeah, that was how it started. I think the Tango TV sessions, or the 5 in 100 sessions, they're the same thing basically. Those sessions sort of fell off in the end, and eventually got superseded by the Abyssal speed mapping sessions, or ASS for short. So that's been a very long-standing speed mapping community event in the Doom community. It has probably been going since Tango TV finished in, what was it, 2013, 2014-ish. It's had its ups and downs, and it's had a couple of hiatuses, but it's still going. I think they're on like their 59th session or something as of this recording. So it's been going on for ages and ages and ages now. It's a monthly thing, and I've taken part in quite a few of these over the months, over the years. And it is just the same sort of principle. We'd all gather in a Discord call or what have you, and just chat nonsense to each other for 2 hours or whatever the time limit happens to be. So yeah, the love of the craft, I think, comes partially, at least, from the social aspect of it. So just being in a call with people who are doing exactly the same things as you, where time is of the essence, and your resources are limited and your themes are set in stone, is a really fun experience. So yeah, I think that's how I caught the bug, and it sort of progressed over time. It got it got very chaotic in a lot of instances. Just a lot of shouting and panicking in the VC and what have you. So yeah, it was equal parts fun and frustrating, I suppose, at times. But yeah, that's the sort of the thrill of it. I do always seek ways to challenge myself, basically, ways to sort of push my boundaries and find ways that I can be as efficient as I can under certain duress, under certain limitations. Because my mantra for life, it has to be said, has always been limitation breeds creativity. So that's always informed my decision making as a creative person, I think, and has pushed me to find myself into in new territory, in new places outside of my comfort zone, and yeah, it continues to motivate me to this day. So that's probably why I also thrive in the field of general MIDI stuff as well. It's all very limitation based, so you very much have to work with what you're given with the general MIDI sound bank, with that very specific set of instruments, with only so many parameters that you can change. Yeah, I've always thrived in that space, and that's essentially what modding for an old game is. It's working with what you have. It's working with the limitations that you're given and trying to make the best of it. And so the Doom community is like a really, really good, great, shining example of what people can do under limitation, I think, because I'm sure you've been part of the community yourself and seen what its output lately has been like. But yeah, it's absolutely astonishing stuff. This community for me is probably the best, most vibrant, and quite honestly most welcoming community that I've ever known on the internet, to be honest. And I think it's just purely down to the reason that a lot of us just want to create and have fun and push the boundaries and do that as a community and just get involved with each other's projects, find ways of, again, like pushing the envelope and seeing what Doom is truly capable of, and like to see how far that 25-year-old game engine can be pushed in terms of creativity. Speed mapping, to return to the original point, I suppose, was my way of doing that, my way of seeing what I could do using certain limitations posed to me, and that would also help me get my general mapping prowess a little bit sharper, just to get my workflow up to speed. Because I used to find that the longer I dwelt on a particular map or project, the quicker I got sick of it. So in a way, I suppose speed mapping helped me kind of sharpen my knife and help me just to get to grips with the whole process of mapping, rather than sort of overloading myself with, oh, what do I do here? Do I recess this wall a little bit here, or do I raise this floor here a little bit? No, a lot of Doom mapping, I think, boils down to just let your creativity flow, as with any creative endeavor, I'm sure, really, and basically just let the ideas come out and don't worry about the nitty gritty, because that can always come later, obviously. But yeah, speed mapping allowed me to just forego a lot of my internal voice saying, worry about this, worry about that, and it just allowed me to map, basically. So yeah, that helped me a lot, gain a foothold in establishing myself as a Doom mapper by just freeing myself of the self-imposed creative shackles, I suppose. Yeah, so yeah, it was a really useful tool. I actually recommend anyone who wants to get their prowess up to speed, try imposing yourself a time limit, and seeing what you can come up with. Basically, there's things like the Pomodoro technique, which are they're all well and good, which I think that has actually worked for me in a couple of instances as well. But yeah, just limitation breeds creativity. I think that's what it boils down to. So yeah, place yourself, time limits. See if you can work with a specific theme that you give yourself. Try not to limit yourself too technically or physically or anything like that. And basically just have as much fun as you can using those limitations that you have. And it does really, really help to have people doing the same thing as you in a specific task or project. So that's where the voice call stuff on Skype and Discord that really helped me along there. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I think I am still employing a lot of those practices today. Speed mapping has definitely helped project me quite far in terms of my mapping career.
Well, you've also done some speed composing with your 30 in 30 series, so that, for those who don't know, one song per day for an entire month. So how do you go by with challenges like these, and how is it that you're able to create a tune with such tight, restrictive schedule on your shoulders?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a blur sometimes, these projects. They go by very quickly for taking like a whole month and like a lot of consistent effort out of me. But I'll try and answer as best I can. So basically, my 30 in 30 series started with me. I think it was Alfonso who I basically challenged to begin with to write 5 pieces of music back to back with, I think it was 25 minutes or 30 minutes, something like that, to write each piece. And we would hop on Skype or whatever. I think I maybe streamed a couple of these on Twitch myself back in the day. And this is around about 2014, 2015. So we'd just meet on IRC and we'd say, fancy a speed MIDI challenge, writing 5 songs back to back, 30 minutes a piece, seeing how far we get. And yeah, we did that quite a few times. So many times, in fact, that I was able to write basically 3 albums of material cobbled together from these sessions. So 30 in 30 number 1 was the product of doing exactly that, mainly with Alfonso. I think I had Stewboy, possibly Tristan, possibly Queen Jazz also took part in these, but it was mainly between me and Alfonso. And we'd basically just run through a couple of these sessions, maybe once a week or something. And as the weeks went by, we did more and more. And, not all of them were successful. It has to be said. It was a lot of duress we were putting ourselves under. But at the end of it, I had basically 30 tracks. I think I had just done back to back with Alfonso just by myself. In a matter of weeks. So I basically just looked everything up and I was like, if I just count these up, actually I have like easily an album here, and a lot of it is like it's quite sort of it's telling, I think, especially for that first album, how speedy I was in the composition process, because some of the songs feel like maybe half of songs, or like the ideas are a little bit half baked or half-assed or whatever. So I went ahead and just published it and was like, yep, that's fine. That's 30 in 30 number 1, because I know I'm going to be doing more of this, because this is a fantastic way, I think, to get some productivity done, basically, just to get some musical juices flowing. So yeah, I think I kept this up with Alfonso and maybe a couple of people over the course of a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And 30 in 30 1, 2, and 3 were produced in a very short span of time. 2014, 2015, I think this is when they were. So I think each time I was trying to basically refine my process and try to write better and better stuff. So I've had 3 albums worth of circumstances to basically refine my craft and get better and better at the whole thing. So that really helped me get my musical prowess sharpened. So by the time 1334 rolled around, I think I was probably in the midst of my university studies. I studied composition and music technology in Western Australia, and this was during a semester break. So I had a bit of time off. This was January 2016 that I wrote that whole album. So 1334 was the outlier, I suppose. So numbers 1 through 3 were just written off the cuff, with me just putting together these midis, sort of like as they came to me, basically as the ideas came to me, as and when Alfonso and I decided we would challenge each other, and what's the word, I guess very naturally. And 1334 was definitely the outsider, because that was a concerted effort by myself to set aside or block some time away from my uni studies to write the sort of music that I knew I wanted to write outside of my studies. And it wound up being like I challenged myself throughout the month basically to write one piece a day as and when I could. And this was January, so I had 31 days in a month. I had a buffer day just in case I needed to take a break, or in case I needed more time to work on a specific track. And I think in the end, it was only like 2 or 3 days that I missed. Well, not even that. I think I was virtually on time for the month. And then I think February 2nd of that year, I had everything done. So I just set aside a little bit of time afterwards to polish everything up, work out any kinks, just add any solos that I felt needed adding. I mean, yeah, you might argue that's against the spirit of the whole thing, like going in afterwards and just making tweaks as and when you want to. I feel like if you want to make tweaks, that's fine. It's just the initial spurt of creativity that's important, at least for me, because sometimes getting an idea off the ground is the hardest part, I have to say. Being faced with a blank canvas, that's the first hurdle you have to overcome, and it oftentimes is the toughest. So 1334 wound up taking me the whole of January 2016 to do. I had that experience with the first 3 of those albums to work from, to piggyback off of, and yeah, it was quite a tough process. I think I did wind up burning myself out for the following month or so. So I definitely needed some recovery time. But it was a lot of fun. And I did the same thing 5 years later with 1335. And that was actually a good deal more fun, if anything, and a lot of I took a few precautions as well to just ensure I wouldn't burn out this time. What I effectively did was, with the 5th one, which I obviously did last year, so January 2021, I looked through my work in progress folders, of which I have dozens and dozens, and I've got probably hundreds, thousands of scraps just lying around, perfectly workable music. It's just not finished, because I'm just sort of forever coming up with ideas. So I wound up basically taking a few scraps that I had lying around that really appealed to me, that felt like I could definitely make something out of that. That's a diamond in the rough. That's a piece of music that is just waiting, begging to be finished. So I sorted through a few things. I got a big folder together of maybe 40, 50 MIDIs that were unfinished. And I ran through that for like the duration of January 2021. And that's how I made 1330 number 5. So yeah, that was akin, I suppose, to the 4th one, in that I was taking a whole month to write 30 tracks in 30 days. I should have explained this at the start. The moniker 30 in 30 is 30 tracks in 30 days for the 4th album and the 5th album. And for 1, 2, and 3, it means 30 tracks composed in 30 minutes each. So that's where the name comes from. So I was able to bend the meaning a little bit halfway through the process, I suppose. So yeah, but they, both modes of composition for those albums were really fun to undertake, especially with the social aspect behind it, of just hopping into a call with my buddy Alfonso, or Stuart Bryn, or Queen Jazz, or whoever it was at the time, and just composing and just knuckling down, and again, sort of going panic mode in a couple of instances, but that was half the fun of it, really. And so yeah, 30 and 35 was a lot of fun. I didn't wind up burning myself out with that one, because I just had a lot of the work already done for me. I was just aping on what I had, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. So again, yeah, speed composing. I have been known, I think, to do a lot of things very, very quickly. Just I think efficiency is top of mind awareness for me. Like I have to be able to just work through something with quite a sharp focus, which I'm finding a little bit difficult to do in this day and age because there's so much to do. There's so much. I've always got something on my plate. There's always something that potentially can distract me. But yeah, speed composition, speed mapping, it can all help just to provide a bit of a focus for a fleeting moment, and just to knuckle down and get something done. So yeah, that's how 1330 basically came to be, and that has helped me again with my musical composition, just getting my speed up and my focus sharpened a little, just in terms of being able to work under pressure, under duress. And again, I would say working with people in that space at the same time is extremely helpful once again. So yeah, I would urge anybody who's keen on the idea just to try it out for sure.
Let's talk about some of your other compositions that you've done. For example, The Adventures of Square, the standalone GZ Doom series. I mean, it's received 2 Kako awards from the Doom fanbase, and I think it's safe to say that it's a bit different compared to your other work. So tell us more about the Adventures of Square soundtrack that you made.
Of course, yeah. So the Adventures of Square soundtrack, I should probably mention out of the gate that I had a lot of help when we were putting together the team for Adventures of Square. I did have Alfonso and Queen Jazz and Zazer as well eventually joined our team. And basically the 4 of us did a lot of the music in tandem, not necessarily collaborating, although I did collaborate a lot with Zazer on a couple of the tracks, well, a lot of the tracks for episode 2. We were all kind of like in agreement that there should be a distinct sound of the Adventures of Square. And I suppose that's why it sounds a bit wild and a bit wacky in a lot of places. Because we were pulling on inspiration from all sorts of crazy places. I will say my primary inspiration for the tracks that I did, and I think this did rub off on a couple of the other musicians on the project. In fact, I think I made sure that it did. There's an old PlayStation game or PlayStation and PC game called Gubble, and it features a little purple alien dude, and you're basically running around in his little spaceship, and you're pulling plugs and screws and nuts and bolts out of his planet's surface that have just been put there by some unseen, unknown force. It doesn't sound very interesting, and that's because it isn't. But because the game is not good. But the soundtrack, I was absolutely blown away, just absolutely mesmerized by the soundtrack as a kid. It's some of the most fabulously wacky, just deliberately kooky, goofy, cartoony MIDI music that I've ever heard. So many crazy intertwining melodies, interweaving ideas, absolutely bonkers melodies, percussion, things like that. And the composer Seppo Herm, I think he also goes by the name Fleshbrain. He's a professional composer. He's worked on all sorts of very, very high profile game projects. But the thing that I remember him for is this soundtrack for this game called Gubble on the PS1 that I had growing up. It just wound up being some of the most infectious music I ever heard as a child. So it was sort of top of mind awareness, I suppose, for me while I was devising Adventures of Square, like from a visual perspective as well. So when I put it to the team that we should try to emulate this style, I don't think there was much resistance. I think it was all very much a case of, yeah, those sound awesome. Like that, let's go ahead and do that, because they're all very, very capable musicians, and it seemed like whatever challenge I set them, it was going to be, yeah, let's do it. So so Adventures of Square turned out into such a fun project, and again, I have to thank the team behind it for helping me out with not just the management of the project, but with the maps, with the music, the voice acting, the sound design, the coding and programming, everything under the hood. I wouldn't have been able to pull it off by myself for sure. And I think some of the stuff that we wrote 4 Adventures of Square, both excuse me, both episodes 1 and 2. Wound up being some of my favorite stuff that I've heard in a Doom project. Not to toot my own horn, but yeah, it was so much fun, and I'm so glad that we went in that direction with it.
Let's talk about John Romero's 5th episode of The Ultimate Doom, which is, of course, Sigil, which featured a MIDI soundtrack by you, of course. So, how did you react when God Emperor Romero reached out and offered you this role as a composer? And what was the songwriting process and kind of direction that you went for with this one?
So, when was this? This must have been 2019, something like that. Yeah, I think it was a very boring but sunny afternoon in Australia. I was living with my parents at the time, and I think my reaction as soon as I got that message, it was over Facebook of all places, and it was like, "Hey, Mum, Dad, John Romero just said that my midis are cool." It was surreal. It was just, yeah, so out of the blue. I did not expect it to happen at all, but it turned out he had messaged me with the express purpose of getting permission from me to feature my midis in Sigil, which I knew Sigil was happening at the time, but I think talks had happened beforehand, like over Discord or whatever, between me and certain other members of the community that, John Romero's coming out with a new episode for Doom. Maybe some people should write midis for it, I was like, yeah, I will probably do that. That sounds like an interesting project idea. And then he just comes to me directly and says, "Hey, Jimmy, your midis are excellent. Hey, do you mind if I use these?" So yeah, it was absolutely surreal, and I still can't believe it. But he was such a good guy to work with. He was very cooperative, very understanding, and very, very just easy to talk to. Just easy to just chat. Like he's just a guy, really. He might be our God Emperor John Romero, but he's so laid back, and he's so cool. He's just cool to talk to. So yeah, that was my reaction initially. I did help him with selecting the tracks for Sigil in the end. I think people know Hate Machine from Sigil, and that's one that I specifically chose that he might like. And he said, "Yeah, I like that one. That's going in as E5M1's track." So yeah. A lot of the other midis that he picked out from my catalogue, ones that were for abandoned or vaporware projects, things that hadn't quite seen the light of day yet for whatever reason, like maybe the project manager went missing or it just got abandoned or whatever. So there was quite a selection in the end, quite a broad range of themes in Sigil's soundtrack in the end, purely because of that, I think, because a lot of those midis do tend to be on the older side of things. I think probably the oldest in the set might be E5M7's track, Watching You, which I remember writing in probably 2008. So barely any of these tracks are recent, quote unquote. I think Hate Machine is probably the most recent, which I think is also why it's probably the best out of them. So yeah, it was a very surreal experience, I'll tell you that, and it was extremely fun as well to work on a couple of tracks bespoke for Sigil. Because I basically said to Romero, "Hey, do you want like a title screen theme and an intermission screen theme?" And he was like, "Sure." And I think he actually gave me some reference tracks, didn't he? Yeah, he gave me some reference tracks to work from. I think, I think it was from some Irish band or Irish artist or something. Obviously, he lives in Ireland at the moment, so I think a lot of his culture kind of comes from that country at the moment. So he gave me a couple of reference tracks to write new pieces for Sigil, and that's how the title theme came to be. It's how the intermission theme came to be. And one of them is called Lands of Ire, because it's a sort of clever little wordplay pun on Ireland for that reason. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was incredible, and I really, really do hope that I can get a similar sort of experience out of Sigil 2, if and when that happens. But yeah, it's very exciting to see what John's up to these days. And again, he's just such a swell guy. Would absolutely love to work with him again in the future, for sure.
You composed a track alongside the legendary Lee Jackson. What was it like to be able to work on a song alongside him?
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. He's so humble. He's so modest. He's just the most down to earth guy you'll ever meet. Basically, I think the whole thing just came about because I asked him. Basically, it wasn't that long ago. I think he was a little bit more active on Discord than perhaps he is now, and he was chiefly active on a sort of semi-public Discord for Doom World users like myself. And this was, I think, this was last year, wasn't it? Or maybe the year before. Anyway, I basically just asked him, just out of the blue, just one day, said, "Hey, you're working on a couple of Doom projects. I'm working on this project potentially with you. Would you like to collaborate?" And he said, "Yeah, I might. I might not have a huge amount of time, but that does sound fun." So in the end, he contributed some really, really cool melodies. And I deliberately set about making the piece sort of fit his general style as well from the Rise of the Triad days. So a lot of the way that we shaped the track came down to, I think, very early on, it was decided primarily that we should have a Rise of the Triad-esque piece of music, just with all original melodies and whatnot. So it's up tempo, it's fast and hectic, and it's got some crazy percussion in it. It's like vaguely Latin influenced as well, I suppose. So yeah, it was good fun. With lots of bombastic brass and synths as well. So it was great fun. He did wind up being quite limited on time, which is all well and good. And I think he was in talks with his publisher at the time, potentially. So he was sort of caught in the midst of a few different projects at the time. So it was still great to be involved with the guy because he was so friendly and so cool about the whole. And in the end, we got an absolutely fantastic piece of music out of it. I'm really, really grateful that I did get the opportunity to work with him. And I see that he's undertaken commissions now. So yeah, I'm hoping eventually I can work with him again because that was a lot of fun. And hopefully he does return to the Doom sphere sometime soon because it was really great to just see him just chilling and hanging out with people who enjoyed Doom and loved modding and mapping and making music for the game, and like he was involving himself quite deeply with certain community MIDI packs and projects on the Doom World forums at the time, and it would be absolutely brilliant to see him do that again for sure. I would absolutely love to see Lee make a return again to the community if it's within his ability to do so for sure. It's just working with him was an absolute treat.
Of course, you're not limited to just Doom, of course, as you've made MIDI tracks for various other projects. One thing that caught my eye was when you made an original soundtrack for It Out In D.C. by Sunstorm Interactive, which is currently available on Jimmy's Bandcamp, for those who don't know. Why did you decide to actually do this? Well, what were you trying to accomplish here with that?
I was reached out by, I think, Night Fright is his name, in a lot of circles on, I think, Doom and the Duke community. He involves himself quite deeply in both communities. And I was reached out to by Night Fright probably as early as 2013 to get this project underway. It wound up taking a bit of a backseat for a long time, and that's why it didn't come out until I think 2016. But it was quite a lot of fun. I think again around 2016 was a bit of a weird time for me because I was still, I think, nursing a bit of burnout from not just my earlier thing with 30 and 30 number 4, but also weathering a bit of university studies related malaise and just general low energy feelings. So it's kind of a miracle that project even came out around that time, but it did. So Night Fright was eager to see what I could do given those restrictions, and he ended up commissioning me to get that project underway properly. So that was around about 2016. So as soon as I saw like a goal in mind, which was to replace that whole soundtrack, because it is just the episode 3 midis, I believe, for that total conversion, or for that partial conversion, DC. As soon as I had an end goal in mind, I was away with it. So I had not very long. I remember it was, I think, towards the end of the year, and I think I was under quite a bit of time pressure one way or another. I can't exactly remember how, but I wound up getting quite a number of very cool tracks out of that. And it was explicitly my goal to imitate the works of Lee Jackson, Bobby Prince, Jenna Ramsey, all these composers from the 90s who had worked on Duke Nukem or Duke Nukem projects. Jenna Ramsey, I believe, is the composer for Duke Caribbean, and a few other projects, potentially with Sunstorm. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, it was always my goal to try and imitate those composers as best I could. And provide each level in DC with its own particular mood and theme. I wound up writing, I think, one extra track in the end, because the track I had initially slated for, I think it was the Smithsonian map, which is the massive sprawling museum map in DC that takes, upwards of an hour, 2 hours to beat for first timers, because it's so labyrinthine and crazy and maze-like. That wound up being the hardest map to write a piece of music for, because I had to make sure that I was going to write a piece of music that was not going to get boring or tiring after many, many repeats. So I wound up writing a piece that I thought, that's probably okay. Not too sure about it. I put it forward to Night Fright, and he was like, "Don't think this is going to work. So how about we try again, and we'll see what we can come up with." And I was like, "Yeah, that's absolutely fair." I wasn't in 2 minds about it anyway. So I did wind up writing a much better track in the wake of that. And the original track that I wrote for that map is the bonus track on that album. It's called Roads to Nowhere. And then I think the track that we wound up using for the Smithsonian map is called Night Watch. So yeah, it was a pleasure to work on that overall. Some really fun little themes I managed to drive out of that project with melodies that felt like they were in keeping with Duke's general mood, because it's not all actiony, powerful, heavy metal stuff in the Duke soundtrack. There's a little bit of that in it, but a lot of it is highly ambient and background and just sets a scene, sets a mood. So I was able to, I think, accomplish that in the end quite nicely. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, it did get me back in the saddle in terms of Duke Nukem as well, because it had been a long time since I'd really picked up Duke Nukem 3D at all, especially for modding purposes, because I was so embroiled in the Doom community by that point that the Duke had really kind of taken a bit of a back seat. So yeah, I put that project through, managed to get it all done, and Night Fright was absolutely elated with the end product as well. So my commissioner was very happy. It got quite a widespread release as well. I don't know if, precisely how many people use it when they run DC. I don't know if it's as tied intrinsically to the levels as perhaps Sigil's MIDIs that I wrote are to Sigil. I mean, Sigil also has the Buckethead soundtrack as well, so I don't know. So yeah, it's I was just, bottom line, it was a lot of fun. So yeah, especially since Lee Jackson, Bobby Prince, they were always my earliest influences, along with Mark Clem and David Shaw and all that sort of stuff. Composers from the early 90s, just in general, they have a certain style of like a certain je ne sais quoi is very, very fun to imitate. Actually, it's quite the challenge to try and imitate those guys. Some of their style you can't really describe, I suppose. You can't really encapsulate it. I think it's just done by doing, So yeah, it was a lot of fun to do that project, and yeah, I'm not ruling out that I will be doing more Duke Nukem stuff in the future. I'll just have to see if another opportunity like that arises. But yeah, it was great fun. I guess bit of a dabbling in a non-Doom project for once as well, because I have to say I have been very fixated on Doom for quite some time.
Let's talk about some of the other games that you've composed for, like the sci-fi boomer shooter Prodeus. Now, to be able to compose an original soundtrack in tandem with Andrew Holzschult making his own original soundtrack for the same game, that must have been incredibly cool, but no easy feat in itself. So please tell us about the composition process with this one.
It was tough, actually. It was rather unlike anything that I'd undertaken. but a huge challenge, and overall one that I really relished. So, Andrew Holsholt, absolute beast of a composer. I have no idea how he does it, but he was he had some big shoes to fill. Basically, those that was a very tough undertaking for me going into it, to be like, okay, well, Andrew Holsholt is almost my competition here, so I've got to try and set the bar to where he set the bar for himself. So I must admit there was a little bit of fear in that in terms of that going into the project, but I think I did hit a stride very quickly, to be honest. I was able to pull on some of my more recent heavy metal influences, less in terms of the prog metal sort of genre and more of the sort of heavy, genty metalcore sort of genre, I guess, that that Holsholt himself does dive into quite a bit. So I was thinking, if I was to just kind of be Andrew Holsholt, but for MIDI, that's probably going to work. So I thought, it's worth a shot. And I wound up doing that for about 10 tracks as well. Yeah, I think we did a block of 5, and then Jason asked me to write another 5 because he liked the first 5 so much. Yeah, huge fun. Very, very outside my usual thing that I do. All the same, it was very challenging, but very, very fun. A lot of down-tuned guitars, heavy percussion, like really industrial, heavy electronic percussion, that sort of thing. And trying to layer synths in ways that sort of felt like they could be kind of like distorted, distortion pedal keyboard sort of things, and the odd like sort of fake organ or mellotron sort of effect. I was really playing around with the general MIDI palette of sounds and seeing what I could squeeze out of them potentially. So yeah, huge amount of fun to experiment with it, and I think I did write some very satisfying tracks in the end. Certainly, certainly Geiger, which you wrote about, was awesome stuff to write and work on. I had a lot of fun just playing around with little rhythms, little musical melodic ideas, that sort of thing. Yeah, just a lot of fun to write with. To write for that project. But again, a huge technical challenge because I was playing around with sounds that I'd never really played around with. Splitting the audio up into discrete chunks so that it could be part of some sort of vertical slice compositional style. So the music could ebb and flow between 3 different phases as the combat intensified or lessened in the game world itself. That was technically very, very challenging as well. So I had to record the MIDIs, make sure they all synced up properly with one another, that they faded in and out at precise, moments in the songs at the correct time. Make sure everything was, working nicely in terms of the transitions. So little sweeping effects like from one to another. I had to compose those specifically, and yeah, definitely a lot more than my usual workload, I suppose, for that project. But ultimately, I think it really did pay off because especially the final album, which again is on my Bandcamp for the Prodeus soundtrack, wound up being a very satisfying listen in the end. All the tracks, I think I really did pour a lot of heart and soul into, and basically to just see if I could match effectively what I was up against in Andrew Holsholt. I absolutely respect the guy. He's an absolutely amazingly talented composer. And I suppose it's good in a way that I had somebody like him to spur me on to do greater things with my own work. It's always good to be able to work in tandem with, even if you're not really specifically collaborating with other people, rather than just composing or working in a vacuum. So it was great to just be part of that project and to have Andrew Holsholt sort of there in my periphery. I wasn't really working with him directly at all. I don't think I really even said a word to him throughout the whole process, but he was there, and he was there to sort of almost kind of subconsciously influence and guide me through the process of composing for Prodeus. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Huge challenge, hugely very technically challenging, but overall really, really worth it. And I really do hope people enjoy that soundtrack in the end, because I know it was probably the one that I have worked the hardest for in the end. But yeah, it was all so worth it.
Now, Supplice is a GZ Doom first-person shooter currently in the works. You're behind the wheel for its soundtrack. So you've already uploaded a few of the tracks to your YouTube channel. What kind of direction are you taking that one?
Yeah, Supplice. So that's been a really, really fun project to work on. What I'm actually doing with that project is I'm actually working in tandem with another composer for it specifically, that being Fortium. And she's an amazingly talented composer. She's done all sorts of great work for all sorts of games over the last few years. She's insanely good at what she does. And with Supplice, we've obviously been it's been in development for some time, and a lot of the original ideas that I was throwing at Mechadon, our project lead, as I said before, a lot of those ideas, go back quite some way, easily 10 years. And so I was throwing a lot of things at Mechadon, a lot of different ideas. And I guess what we have now is, now that we've got Fortium on board, what she's doing is she's taking my MIDIs from back then and really putting a unique spin on it, and creating something that's ultimately greater than some of its parts in a way. We have, so several of the tracks I wrote back in 2017, for example, have been revived by Essel. So she's now producing them properly using Reason, DAW, and she's really, really, she's knocking it out of the park every single time. I hear my own MIDI played back at me at super high quality with like very finely tuned, mixing and instrument choices and parameter automation. Everything that she does, just makes the songs sound so brilliant. So that's been a lot of fun. I've been directly talking with Essel and Mechadon and a few other people on the server about Supplice's soundtrack, and it's been a lot of fun. I have already got most of my ideas down. I've got a lot of the music already done, if not all the music already done. And now it's just a case of seeing what can be done with those ideas. So that's quite a unique sort of situation, I suppose, where I'm having the existing ideas sort of transformed into something super duper cool by another composer. And it's always just fun and great to see. It's always fun to see people doing their own spin on my own music. Like, for instance, there's quite a few people on YouTube, who cover the SIGIL soundtrack, and that's always enthralling to me. That's absolutely incredible. And yeah, with Supplice, Essel's just putting an awesome spin on it. She's taking, I think, some of the more proggy elements from my MIDI music and amping that up to 11. So one thing we have discussed is use of a couple of jazzy elements like funky bass lines. I think she's got some fretless bass samples in there that have been really cool. Saxophone, we're actually going to be using saxophone primarily as like the lead or solo instrument in a lot of these tracks. She's got some awesome guitar samples as well. I think overall we're going for a slightly sort of Steven Wilson, sort of light prog rock sort of feeling with a lot of this soundtrack, and that's going to be very, very exciting to see that take off. And hopefully if you stay tuned to the Supplice Twitter, we're going to be having more music being teased fairly soon. What we are planning, I believe, is a simultaneous release of both the original MIDI and the souped up MP3s by Essel. And it's our hope that we can get that into a little switch in the game, in the menu, that you can flip on and off, so you can choose between the two soundtracks, same way that Prodeus does it, basically. So yeah, it's an awesome project to be a part of, and like I said, it's been quite a long form project, spanning a decade and a half, maybe. I don't know exactly, but yeah, it's great to see that music taking shape. Essel's doing a fine job with it. I should also mention, before I forget him, Bouncy, who is other composer in residence on the Supplice team. He's very, very good at doing moody, dark ambient music, and he's also providing quite a lot of consultancy on the project in terms of sound design. He's mixing a lot of sounds himself. He's writing a lot of ambient tunes for the project as well, where, myself and Essel, I think we tend to favor that sort of music less. I mean, sometimes I find it fun, But it's great to have him on board, because what we can have as a result is jaunty, upbeat, proggy tracks for the, I guess, main body of the soundtrack. And then if we need bouncy to fill in any spaces, perhaps the later levels where things are going to get a bit weird, kooky, and creepy, we can have Bouncy's dark ambient stuff take the hold. So yeah, it'll be great to see where that project goes for sure. I'm very excited to see what comes of it, and yeah, it's certainly been great to be able to be part of the project with those other composers. Like I said earlier, it's great to be able to not work in a vacuum and to collaborate directly with other people on music for a game project of any kind, basically.
One particular project that caught my eye, the Apogee side-scroller Secret Agent, the remake, and you did the soundtrack,
Yes.
a brand new original soundtrack for it. So what exactly did you want to do with its soundtrack?
The commissioner who asked me to do this soundtrack for Secret Agent HD was the Ember Heart Games head developer Primosh, and he was very specific in what he wanted. He laid out a nice design document for me, basically telling me to go and check out some references by Apogee composers for games of the time, things like Biomenace, Blakestone, Commander Keen, Descent, even things like that. So he laid it all out very nicely, and he told me there's a very specific sound palette that I want you to use. It's the Adlib sound palette for DOS games of the era, OPL 2 or 3 or whatever it is. And he pointed me even to a very specific piece of software. I think it was a VST that allowed me to emulate all the different kinds of sound chips back in the day that were used by various DOS games of the era. And I should hasten to add, this is actually a little bit before my time. I didn't necessarily play a lot of Apogee games. I played a tiny bit of Descent, and I think there was Realm of Chaos, which I also played a tiny bit, and a little bit of Duke Nukem 1 and 2, and a little bit of Blakestone, but that was more or less it. I didn't grow Commander Keen specifically, or Biomenace or anything like that. So this was a little bit before my time, so I did have to do a little bit of digging beforehand, but thankfully Primosh was just so thorough and so comprehensive in what he wanted to give me for this project that I was just away with it, very quickly. He gave me plenty of reference tracks, specifically a lot from Biomenace that did inspire me quite a bit. And yeah, he laid it all out very nicely. In fact, I've still got the soundtrack request Google Doc in front of me. I've got that here with me right now. So yeah, he wanted OPL 2, OPL 3 music very specifically. He gave me the music list, how many tracks he wanted, posted screenshots of the remake of Secret Agent to me. Yeah, he went the whole hog. So that's probably the fastest I've ever managed to put things together for a project. That's purely because I was given so much specification and again, I suppose limitation in a way from the commissioner. And that made it a lot of fun to work with. It was good fun to just be able to explore that pool of tracks that hadn't really been much of a prominence in my life, because I was just outside of the era, I suppose, of growing up with those games, because that's like really early 90s stuff that we're talking about, I suppose. And like I was playing Doom at the age of 2, but I wasn't as familiar with the platformers of the MS-DOS era, has to be said. So it was fun to delve into, and it was even better to just knuckle down and just start writing music in that style. Like as soon as I had that VST installed and I had that all working, I was able to get straight into it, and I put together the music for that very, very quickly. So I wound up writing, how many was it? I think 8 or 9 tracks in the end. And he only wanted like tracks that were a minute or a minute and a half long, basically. So it all came together super duper quickly. So yeah, big ups to Primosh from Ember Heart Games for being probably one of my best clients ever, to be perfectly frank about it. I will say this, that as a musician, I'm always on the lookout for commissioners and clients who know for absolute certain what they want and what they and how they want it done. So basically, just lining all of this out for me in no uncertain terms was the best way that he could have approached me about this project. And I'm really, really thankful that he did. It was a really great opportunity and quite a learning experience as well. Like just delving into all of this cool music from the early 90s. I'd like only basically just missed in terms of my upbringing with computer games at the time. But yeah, I mean, back to your original point, I suppose it was less about what I wanted to do with the music and just less about and more about what was actually needed, because it was a full-on commissioned project, and he was so respectful and accommodating, and he was able to provide me with everything I needed for that project, and it came together so quickly as a result. It was brilliant to work on that project in particular.
You've also released a MIDI prog rock kind of tracks. Well, actually, you've released quite a few MIDI prog rock tracks that have clocked in well over the 10-minute mark. So what is it that inspires you to kind of create these singles? And also, what keeps you coming back to creating, like, say, 10-minute, 15-minute kind of songs like these?
Well, I suppose in a way, this is a bit of an experiment in a way, because I've rarely find myself in a position where I have a single track that feels like it warrants its own single release. Like, I think singles are a great promotional tool for musical artists, but less so maybe for people in the realms of game development and game music, basically. So what I'm what I'm trying to pull off here is just to see if there's any sort of saleable aspect of these longer form tracks, and are people going to want to kind of like check out more of this stuff, or like is this a saleable thing? Is this a thing that can can garner interest? And it seems to be taking off quite nicely. I think it's gaining obviously less traction than say my SIGIL soundtrack or perhaps my 30 in 30, but it's still a lot of fun to work on these long form tracks. Necromancer's Demise, which is 13 minutes long, came about again purely because I think I just had the inspiration in my head. It was after listening to a track by Circus Maximus, who are, I think, a Norwegian metal band, and that was again a longer form track. So it was like, yeah, that's just swimming around in my head at the moment. I'll just get some ideas down, and I've got this cool name in mind, The Necromancer's Demise. I might as well just run with that and see what happens. And I think I went into it specifically with the intention in mind to have a single release that I could put up for streaming and purchasing on Bandcamp. And yeah, that first one, The Necromancer's Demise, certainly seemed to go down quite well, and it put me on the path. This was last year, I think last April I released it, and it certainly put me on the path of being able to just write more in that sort of style. In fact, it kind of became a bit of an obsession. Like, in a way, I was trying to sort of outdo myself with every successive release. So, Necromancer's Demise, 13 minutes, released that in April last year. I followed that up with Dragonflight in September of 2021. That's 11 minutes long. I wrote that as part of a birthday gift that I put together for my friend Dragonfly, who you may know as the lead developer behind Evernity and one of the mappers for Prodeus as well. Fingers in quite a lot of pies across the shooter scene, and he's made quite a name for himself. And he's the reason that I'm in the UK right now as well. He was living in this house that I'm in right now up until September last year. So in a way, Dragonflight I wrote for him to basically wish him a happy birthday, and also I guess to mark his moving house, like from where we live now, down to Portsmouth. I think he's now living. So yeah, he's such a good guy, and it was really fun to put this particular track together for him because it's another big, epic, long piece of music. Features a lot of very fun little things, little musical ideas that I think kind of really tickled his fancy. There's lots of prog elements in there. There's a little bit of leprous. There's a bit of frost, bit of everything in there that I think he would enjoy in a piece of music. So yeah, Dragonflight, that was the second one of those big epics that I wrote. Then there was the Mountaineer, which was, I think, at the tail end of 2021, or perhaps the beginning of this year. I can't quite remember now. But I wrote this one basically to outdo the Necromancer's demise. It wasn't written for anything in particular, like Necromancer was. It wasn't written with a specific goal or ideal in mind. There wasn't really any sort of impetus behind a sort of plot thread connecting everything together in this track. I just wrote a long piece, called it The Mountaineer, and I actually divided it up into 5 sections as well, which is something that I haven't done since the Godhood Suite back in 2012. I released that. Multi-movement pieces, I've always had a real deep respect for those, and it's a lot of fun to just write music that takes you on a big journey through multiple chapters. I leave it very open and open to interpretation, because there's no particular plot line or story thread running through it. It's just the titles of the individual chapters that leave you to, fill in the blanks of your own. So you've got the first opening movement called Climb, the second one is Collapse, and then the third is In the Belly of Fire. Number 4 is Basilisk, and then 5 is To the Ends of the Earth. So I think already there's a little bit of storytelling just in those titles, but again, they don't really mean anything in particular. But yeah, that's how the Mountaineer came to be. It was just, I wanted to write another long form piece, and I wanted to just split this one up into discrete chapters to see what feelings and what moods I could conjure up in a single sitting, in a single track, I suppose. It was a lot of fun to work on this track, and it wound up being 16 minutes long, just under 17 minutes long. So yeah, lots of ideas going on there, lots of crazy solo. It's got my favorite finish in any piece of music that I've written. So it's got like that typical sort of trash can finish where, big hit on the guitar, big epic chord that just closes the track, and then the drums go mental for like a few seconds, and then it just finishes like that. So a real adventure of a track, that one, and a huge amount of fun to put together. And again, what it's about is largely up to you as a listener. What it means is ultimately up to the listener. And then I guess the fourth one in this series, I guess we could call it, of MIDI singles, would be the latest one that I've just released in the last week or so, Arcane. Now, Arcane came about because I had the word in mind, and it's usually the title that comes first with these things. But I had the word in mind, and I had recently gone with my friends in my choir down to Wiltshire to sing in a church down in Wiltshire. It was a lovely day out we had. It was gorgeous weather, beautiful scenery down there in Wiltshire. It's mostly just open farmland, and it's absolutely incredible to just roll through the hills on a car trip. Absolutely perfect stuff. And we drove past Stonehenge, which has always fascinated me, that monument. It's it's one of those things that, nobody really quite knows how to describe the feelings that it evokes. But, some people just think it's a bunch of rocks. That's fair enough. And, it may just be a bunch of rocks, but it seems to be a bunch of rocks with like a very specific purpose. That by itself has like always fascinated me. And certainly just driving past it, just sitting in the back of a car while I'm just chatting away with friends in my choir, and then we just go past Stonehenge. I don't know why, but it just stuck in my head as a profound moment in my life, and I'm glad that it did, because the piece that I wrote afterwards with that word arcane, meaning old time sort of magic sort of stuff, which I guess loosely ties into the sort of druidic nature of what Stonehenge was supposedly, or is, alluded to have been used for. So I wound up writing this track, and it was a huge amount of fun to put together, because I don't know, I just went ham. I wrote probably some of the most melodically dense stuff I've ever written, some fairly complicated rhythms, even though the whole piece is in 4/4. And there's an Irish jig breakdown in the middle of it. So I pulled out all the stops, basically. It was so much fun to do. And Yeah, here's some more, because these pieces are, I guess, just the start of an experiment where I kind of want to start releasing MIDI singles perhaps a little bit more frequently. And I suppose in a way they're also a potential build up to me starting to release my own non-MIDI material as singles. And the plans I have for that are still a little bit nebulous. And basically just watch this space, because I have lots of ideas. I've always got loads of ideas buzzing around in my head, but I've potentially got so many ways that I could approach that. So it's not clear to me right now what I'll do next. But I suppose these singles that I'm putting out are kind of like a testing ground for what's to come. So yeah, just keep your ear to the ground, and I will I'll just be updating people, I guess, on my Discord and my Patreon and Bandcamp and whatnot, and just whatever the future brings, it will bring. So those 4 tracks are basically a sort of precursor and a little bit of an ongoing experiment in how saleable, I suppose, my my MIDI artistry is with these longer form tracks and with these B-sides and things like that I put out as well. So I've got a couple of B-sides attached to these. So Necromancer has another slightly longer form track as a B-side called Thaumaturge, and Arcane has a B-side as well called Dance MacArthur. So yeah, it's an experiment. It's an ongoing experiment in me trying to just branch out and seeing what people are willing to check out on my Bandcamp, just to see what I can do on that front, and what basically what I'm planning to do next. And it's just some fun, basically. There's no real impetus behind it. If I get commissioned to do a longer form track, I'll be very happy, because they are very fun to do. And being that I now write quite efficiently, I don't tend to get too tired of those longer tracks. I think Arcane might have been the hardest to write. Not entirely sure why, but I think it did take the longest time to perfect. I think it was mainly structure I had to just think quite deeply about in order to get it into a piece of music that was digestible for the human ear, being so lengthy and so full of ideas, so many interweaving rhythms and melodies and complicated layers and things to it. So yeah, it's basically just me just seeing what I'm capable of doing, basically, if I am just given one particular project to focus on for a length of time.
What would you consider to be some of your favourite tracks that you've ever composed?
This is a very good question indeed. I'm gonna go ahead and say the Necromancer's Demise, I think, still stands out to me as being incredibly just telling of what my musical my main musical artistry is nowadays, because it's a long form track. There's lots of crazy guitar stuff, some solos, both guitar solos and keyboard solos, non-standard chord progressions as well, things like that. That was me really trying to evolve as an artist, and I think it really hit the nail on the head, so to speak. So the Necromancer's Demise, my 13-minute long MIDI epic, do go check that out. I want to say Hate Machine as well is probably amongst my favorites of the music that I've written over the last 10 years, just because it seems to be my most celebrated track, especially in the SIGIL OST. It's definitely up there in terms of the ones that people identify me with. People think, oh, the opening notes of SIGIL, da 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 da. That's Jimmy right there, So I think that's so I think it's fair to say that should go up there, just because it's incredibly iconic. Like that track has stuck in a lot of people's minds, and those first few notes, for example, are the ones that I think a lot of people associate me with primarily now. So yeah, it's a funny story about him. The track itself was originally part of one of my 1330 albums, and it was the one that I recommended John Romero use for SIGIL, just because I felt that it sounded doomy, So he said, "Yeah, I like that a lot. Let's use that for E5M1." And it's essentially a speed MIDI. Like, I wrote it in, I think, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that. and it's become probably my most celebrated track. So yeah, it's funny how these things work. I would have to say from the Eternity soundtrack. Oh, it's a tough one, this, because I've got some very celebrated tracks in this one as well. Motion Machine seems to be among my most celebrated on from the Eternity soundtrack. It's this crazy, fast paced, waltzy, very technically, how would you describe it? Technically diverse and technically dense piece of music. Lots of very rapid solos and fast tapping melodies and things like that. And it's definitely, it's about 6 minutes long as well, so it's a slightly longer track. It took me a lot of time to put that one together, and ultimately I'm so glad that it turned out the way it did, because it's definitely been very, very cool to see what people's reactions to that one are. I will also mention Ghost Grinder from Eternity. I'm not going to be able to remember if it was Ghost Grinder or Brutal Schism that I wrote at the very last hurdle in Eternity's development, but we're talking, the middle of 2019. The project's just about to release. End of 2018, I'm pretty sure. The project's just about to release. Doom's birthday is just coming up, and it was the 25th anniversary of Doom's release, wasn't it? So it was 2018. It's early December. We're putting the final touches on the product, and one of the tracks from the soundtrack is uncredited. So we haven't been able to find the original author of the track or what the name of the track is or anything like that. And I chime in and I say, so why don't we just write something new? Like, I can do that right now. Give me a couple hours, I'll be back. And sure enough, in about 2 or 3 hours, I'd written Ghost Grinder. And that now replaces Map 24's track in the Eternity soundtrack. So, yeah, again, that seems to have been one of the most memorable pieces in the soundtrack. And a lot of people just seem to, bring that particular track up when they think of the Eternity soundtrack and when they think of me. So I'll definitely say Ghost Grinder, tied with Motion Machine, I think, for Eternity soundtrack stuff. And I suppose I should mention about the Adventures of Square soundtrack. I think Jet Your Own Pack from the Adventures of Square soundtrack is one of the most... It's some of the most fun I've had composing a piece of music, I think. Because Jet Your Own Pack is from the second level of episode 2. It's this bouncing, cartoonishly over-the-top, proggy, bass-driven piece of music that's, funky and off-kilter and a bit strange. Again, quite Gobble influenced as well, but certainly quite influenced by some of my more progressive influences as I've grown up and as I've started writing more music. That was a lot of fun writing that piece, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. It's one of the few tracks in the Adventures of Square soundtrack that is purely my own work, so it's not credited to myself and another composer in the Adventures of Square team, which is unusual because I had so much fun working with the Adventures of Square team on the music, particularly in terms of the direct collaborations I was doing, that it does seem odd that there's just one outlier that I purely did myself, but I just had so much fun writing that track by myself that I don't think it needed anybody else to help me out with it. I was just on a roll with that one and really, really happy with how that one turned out. So I guess, that's a nice sort of palette of choices for some of my favorite pieces of all time.
Jamie, let me just say it has been a blast having you on. Thank you so much for coming on board.
No trouble at all, Jake. It's been great to just natter on about myself and Doom and all the rest of it. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to your many, many fans out there, especially in the Doom community?
Yeah, I would say watch this space. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, so keep an eye out for future developments, more pieces of music, more tracks that I'm writing, more Doom projects I'm going to be part of. There's always something exciting going down in the community. So shout outs to all of you in the community for keeping Doom alive and for making my tenure in the community as fun as it has been. Thanks, guys.
And I'd also like to thank my wonderful fans out there for tuning into another great interview right here on the Cyberden, your weekly dose of tech and games. So see you later, Jimmy, music maestro extraordinaire. I am looking forward to more of your cool tracks, and I'm sure many others are as well.
Thanks very much, Jake. See you later.